The time has come for my people to go.
I'm not a queen, I'm a servant of the people. I'm not a king, I'm a servant of the people. It's what the people demand, and we gonna keep fighting till we get that land. I'm not a queen, I'm a servant of the people. I'm not a king, I'm a servant of the people. It's time to rise, to get what we want, we got to organize.
Good morning, good day, good afternoon, good evening, good night, good people, good comrades, wherever you are in the world. This is the Pantsula podcast presented to you by the All African People's Revolutionary Party, or the A-APRP. The objective of the A-APRP is a united Africa under scientific socialism. If you have any questions about what that means for us, you can contact us here. You can also go to the international A-APRP site, AAPRP-intl.org. I am Jamilah. I am here with some wonderful comrades today. I'm so happy about this. And I'm sure you have seen one of these comrades on our program. Ahjamu has been on our program before. If you have regularly watched or listened, you may be familiar with Ahjamu. Ahjamu also co-hosts our Ancestors' Voices with Shukura, who is also here with us today. And before we further introduce the comrades and let them do whatever it is they do, because it is a beautiful thing that they do, I would be remiss if I do not honor our ancestors, because you already know what time it is. The work they did towards our liberation laid the guidelines for what we are doing today. So it is crucial we honor them. And right now, in light of people honoring the so-called Thanksgiving, we call it Thanksgiving, we call it Indigenous Genocide Day, whatever people call it who don't celebrate that day. There are various names for it, National Mourning Day, etc. But it is a day, and also today, these couple of days that are the foundations of capitalism. So they call it Black Friday. I call it, as others call it, Buy Nothing Day. But I want to acknowledge a couple of ancestors who laid the groundwork in what is the land back movement around the world. So a couple of people who were on the front lines of the liberation struggles of the Borican people, or the people of Puerto Rico, the Puerto Rican nationalist movement. We want to honor today Lolita, Lebrón, and Blanca, Canales. So Lolita Lebrón was on the front lines of the armed struggle against U.S. imperialist takeovers of Puerto Rico. In 1954, she and other comrades went to the U.S. House of Representatives and fired shots as they unveiled the flag of Puerto Rico, which had been illegal, and they shouted, "Freedom for Puerto Rico now." Upon her arrest, she yelled, "I did not come to kill anyone. I came to die for Puerto Rico." She was convicted of a 50-year sentence and was commuted after 25 years. Several years after her passing, she was jailed again for 60 days for her actions of participating in the mass protests of the U.S. Navy's occupation of the island of Vieques, where she entered a restricted military area. She held no regrets. And in 1998, of her actions in 1954, she said, "The armed struggle is the people's last recourse. That is where all the laws that oppress us are born." Ashe. Another person we'd love to honor is Blanca Canales. So she was a member of the Puerto Rican Nationalist Party and was an organizer with the Daughters of Freedom, the women's wing of the party. She was also on the front lines of the struggle, but this time it was the Jayuya uprising, where she stored arms at her residence. Not only did she and other comrades occupy public utility areas like the post office, but they also occupied the police station there. As they entered the town's central place, they also released the Puerto Rican flag, which was illegal at that time. They announced that Puerto Rico was now a free republic. For 3 to 4 days, the nationalists had control. And then we all know what happened, because if there's one thing the U.S. despises, it's a liberated people. So the US used every means they could to weaken the liberation movement. They used not only US troops and airstrikes, but they also utilized the Puerto Rican National Guard. On November 1st, 1950, the revolutionaries surrendered. She was sentenced to a life imprisonment plus 60 years after being convicted of killing a cop, wounding others, and burning down the post office. In 1951, she entered the Alderson Federal Prison Camp in Alderson, West Virginia. There, she developed a friendship with Lolita Lebrón, the other person we're honoring today, and Rosa Collazo, who was the treasurer of the New York City chapter of the Puerto Rican National Party. In 1967, Canales was pardoned by the Puerto Rican governor at that time, Roberto Sanchez Villela. So those are the two people we are honoring on this episode. Ashe, thank you for your work, and we hope the work we are doing are honoring the work you have done. Thank you so much. And now, as mentioned, we have a couple of wonderful comrades here today who also understand and recognize the work our ancestors did. Every week, you can hear our ancestors' voices. Every Sunday, we can depend on that. And even if it's bi-weekly, whatever it is, we can depend on our ancestors' voices to be one of the fueling fires of this information. So we have Ahjamu with us, we have Shukura with us, the Umi family members, my dear comrades. I just want to say, we've discussed this before on, I'm sure, at least one episode, but several. So Ahjamu, we met in Portland, Oregon, and I was organizing elsewhere, and you always talked about the A-APRP, and I was like, oh yeah, I was like slightly familiar, but not as familiar to be like, oh, I'm gonna get involved. And so, because there was a chapter in New York, but we moved to Oregon, we did a lot of community defense work there, and you completely, at every level, always talked about the work of the party and how important that was. I ended up going to an African Liberation Day event with you, and I said, I'm joining the party. So here we are today. I think it was been like 9, almost 10 years later for me. So I really want to thank you for bringing me into this space and emphasizing how important this work is. And so I want to definitely lift you up as a comrade who inspired me to do all of this. And I know that like the work that you have done has definitely rubbed off on Shukura. So I just want to just really intro with that. And I don't even know what else to say except for that. But before we even get into a discussion about what we want to talk about, which is revolutionary parenting, I want to hear both of your stories. Before we even get to how you came to do our ancestors' voices, what are your stories in terms of how you came into finding an ideological framework that suited the work? How did you come into the work of the A-APRP? And what inspires you to keep doing this work?
Shukura, should I start?
Please.
So yeah, first, Comrade Jamilah, I just want to thank you also because, when I was in Portland and I really was focused on trying to start an A-APRP chapter there, I went through a lot of people, a lot of back and forth, and it wasn't until you came that things started to really stabilize. So that was really inspiring for me to, after so many, you know how it is, you invest a lot of time and energy into people, and a lot of times we're not really ready to respond to that. So you did respond. So you get 100% credit and respect for that. And you will forever be dear to me because of that relationship we've nurtured since that time. But to answer your question, for me, I grew up, I was exposed to white supremacy at a very early age. unfortunately, violent white supremacy. And because of that, I began to seek out answers. First I wanted to learn how to defend myself because I had experienced being victimized by terrorists in this system, police and vigilantes and all types of bottom shoe scum. And so I wanted to do that. And I joined an organization called the Pan-Africanist Secretariat, and they had a strong nationalist focus, strong focus. But there were some things about it that made me somewhat uncomfortable. Like, it was extremely patriarchal in the organization. They had a very, very strong image of men leading and women following men. And, I just didn't subscribe to that philosophy, even at 17 years old, which is what I was at the time. And so I kind of took a kind of a arm's length approach with them, but I did participate enthusiastically in their self-defense trainings, their weapons trainings, and all those things, because I wanted to learn those things, and I respect them for helping me learn that. But then, I was still looking for something else, and Kwame Ture, who's Stokely Carmichael, he came to speak at Fresno State University. That's where I was living then, in Fresno, California, and he spoke, and I was going there, because I wanted to hear him talk about honkies and white people, because that's where I was mentally at that time. And that's all I wanted. And the flyer had him, it had a picture of Kwame Nkrumah on it and Sekou Touré. And, I didn't know I was an African. I didn't know anything about that. And if you would have called me an African, you needed to duck. So I didn't understand who these people were on the flyer, and it kind of turned me off a little bit. And then when I got to the event, he had a Palestinian student speak first, and that really turned me off. I'm like, what are these Arabs doing here? Why is this? But then he talked about it. He explained who Kwame Nkrumah was, who Sekou Touré was. He explained why we had to listen to the Palestinian speaker and someone from the American Indian movement, which I also didn't understand at that time. And it made sense to me. And I remember he talked about Assata Shakur. That was the first time I ever heard her name, when he talked about her in 1980 there. And so I went and studied, because I always would do that. I would hear something, I would go investigate it. So I went and studied, and I started to get a little better understanding. And a couple of years later, I was in Sacramento here, and he came to speak here, and I heard him. And we were working with people from the party. I was a student still in college. We were working with people from the party, and I developed relationships with them. And shortly after that, I joined. So that's how I got involved. And I met, in my student organizing, I met Shukura's mom, and we started dating, and we developed a relationship, and we joined the party together. And so the party had a profound impact on us. There were clear values. A lot of the values I was seeking before I found the A-APRP that I hadn't found. The concept Nkrumah talks about of changing us as human beings, making us new people for a revolutionary society, and the tools, the criticism, self-criticism, democratic centralism, all of that really resonated with me from day one. And so I threw myself into it heads first, and I wanted to live and breathe it. And so when we had Shukura, we made certain decisions then. I mean, this is, moving towards 40 years ago. We were deciding how we wanted to raise her. We wanted to raise her with a strong emphasis on African identity and a revolutionary personality, and understanding that this is not her home, this is not her society. We are African people fighting for a free and united and socialist Africa, and this land belongs to the indigenous people of the Western Hemisphere. So from day one, she was raised with that. She was, on Thanksgiving, we would go to Alcatraz. The American Indian Movement does their on Thanksgiving there. We would do that every year. They would allow us to speak out there. We did regular work with them throughout the year. We did regular party work. We always had events, conferences, everything. And she, from the time she was in a stroller, she was at those events. I remember when she was a month old, I have an Africa clock that I bought in May of 1987. And it was a month after Shukura was born. And I bought a Malcolm X bag and an Africa clock at this big African Family Day event. And I had her on my back all day. And I passed out about 5,000 flyers for African Liberation Day. And the clock still works. It's on my wall here in my house. I still have the bag. I don't know how I kept both of them, but I have. through all these years. And they just always, every time I look at each of them, and I look at the clock every day, it just reminds me of when Shukura was born and how we really were intentional. We made a lot of mistakes, but we were really intentional on ensuring that she would grow up with a strong sense of self, strong sense of her people, and a need to make a commitment to make the world better. And we continue to do the best we can to do that.
Thank you.
That
Thank
is,
you.
yes. Oh, I'm sorry, Jim. Go ahead.
No, what's your story, Shukura?
Oh, you're so silly. So I thank you, Daddy. That was a beautiful segue. So I would say that, I always knew as a child that I wanted to be in an organization working for justice, but I wasn't necessarily sure I wanted to be a part of the party, right? And so I would join, student organizations as a high school student. And then when I got to college, I was in different organizations and whatnot. Some of them were even more resisting and socialist driven than others, right? I was always clear that I was anti-capitalist. I didn't really go around mentioning that to people because I was still grappling with popularity and all these things. But I knew little things, like I knew never to wear red, white, and blue, because that was initially communicating that this is my country. And I understood very clearly that this is not my country. And I would say things like that. Like some of my friends would say, well, do you want to get together on Thanksgiving? And I would say, no, I'm not really available. Whereas now I tell them I don't celebrate that holiday because it's a day of rape and theft of land. And it's very uncomfortable when I say those things. But I understand now at 35 years, we need to be uncomfortable for growth to really occur. And so if we just choose to ignore that, or even if we choose to still, quote unquote, not celebrate that day, but on that day we're eating cranberry juice and sauce, then we're still, I think, communicating, A, to the indigenous people, you really don't matter. And B, I think we're communicating overall that it's easier to swim with the stream than it is against it. And that's a statement that I actually learned from my dad as well. It's so much harder to stand up against all of society and say, this is wrong, and I'm going to stand here by myself and do that. But yet more of us need to figure that out. And so I recently joined work study. Recently, not I've been in the party for the last 10 years. No, like in February will be 3 years that I have been in work study. So still kind of grappling with, is this the organization that I want to be in? And what I've come to realize in I'll say 10 to 15 years that I have been organizing, what I have come to realize is it's the same consistent problem that I have ran up against in every single organization that I've been in, where there was no base of political education increasing. And when I tried to suggest that or mention something like that, the pushback was unbearable, right? To the point of, why are we doing that? We don't need to read and all these things. And it's like, we do need to read because we're affecting community, and we need to understand like what some of the problems are that our people are facing. Also, so you're welcoming the idea of being ignorant. That's literally what you're saying right now. And so I started to ask myself, why are you putting so much time and energy? We just got done having a conversation about how materials that you quote unquote own, how are you using them to build up the party or the movement or the people? And so I am leasing a car now, and I would literally pack my car up with strollers and car seats every year for this community baby shower that we would do. I would use gas to drive all the way across town to pick up diapers and things like that. But yet there's no ideological development. We're just doing the same thing like a hamster on a wheel. And yes, our proceeds would help make a difference temporarily, right? One family would have one more car seat, but yet as a mass of people, we're still being insignificant, and we're still being treated insignificantly, and somebody's still going to get shot down that same day, even though we just gave out a free car seat this morning. So I think I was just coming to a point where I was just trying to figure out, white supremacy is in everything, imperialism is in everything, capitalism is in everything. I need to figure out a way to develop myself ideologically, because there are a lot of things I don't know. And when I would have conversations with my dad and my mom, I got tired of them dropping information that I wasn't familiar with. I love seeking new information, and I got tired of hearing about who the first president of Ghana was. I want to know that. I don't need you to tell me. I want to know that for myself. So that's when I just finally decided, and I said, well, maybe I could just start reading books from the work study list, because I was afraid to commit. And I think it's really important to say this for anybody who's watching this, who's not in an organization right now. You might be wondering, how are you going to devote the time to it? Because it is time consuming. If you do it right, it is time consuming. And so I was faced with that same decision 3 years ago. But I think the reason I decided to just go ahead and do it was because I said to my dad, well, I could just take some books from the reading list and just start reading them individually. but that still is supporting the notion that individualism is the way to go, where the whole purpose of work study is for you to take the information, process it, regurgitate it back, and discuss it with other people who may or may not have the same perspectives and how they see it. We have to get messy with how we understand the information, because that's how we grow as a people, which means that's how we grow and develop the party. And so my dad challenged that, and he said, you're not going to be able to grow individually. Like, how is that going to help? You need to talk about this with other people. And so February of 2020, I said, okay, I think I'm ready to join work study. And I was scared because I didn't want to commit to something that I couldn't maintain. And he said, well, just give it a 6-month trial. We usually ask people to just devote 6 months to it and just see where you are. Take it seriously, but also be held accountable. If you can't make a meeting, communicate that, try to provide your discussion questions and just keep going. And I realized, okay, this is not, they're not going to kick me out. They're not going to take away my African card. Like, I understand that life happens and things like these happen. And I'm in school. So I've been struggling recently with balancing between trying to graduate and also still meeting my work study needs. But it obviously has been the best decision I made, because ironically, being in work study has made me a stronger student in terms of writing this dissertation. I was already talking about capitalism and white supremacy in my papers before, but now I identify as a critical cultural scholar, where I truly understand that power and money have positions in how we afford health access. And so being able to articulate that in my paper, I think, has been really critical for people, because a lot of people are not connecting the fact that capitalism is going to cause you to be unhealthy. Whereas that's literally my whole lit review, is talking about that system by itself and helping people understand that. So the party has definitely built me up, and work study has been one of the few things that I can rely on in terms of having my own knowledge base, because I've been able to bounce ideas with other work study members. So yes, that would be my response to that, Jamilah.
My goodness, that's wonderful. That is amazing. And I want to get to the point of our ancestors' voices, because the stories that you just told, you getting with you, Shukura, who had just been in the A-APRP for organizing with the A-APRP for under a year. And then we have Ahjamu, who's been in since 1984. So having just the technological changes that exist, which are always changing, no matter how imbued we are to it. But now everyone has a podcast, but there's people who make reactionary podcasts, and there's people who do revolutionary content in podcasts. But what ways do you see our ancestors' voices as being used as a tool towards this work we do? Like, what are the things that you've done that are different than, say, something that's more reactionary or just a regular podcast?
Well, I would just say, I think the most important lesson I learned from the A-APRP from the time I stepped into a work study circle is the importance of building institutions for our people. If you think about it, the capitalist system has tons of institutions. We just experienced one yesterday, right? Thanks-taking. They have this every year. And why do they do that? Because they want to promote the notion of that this land is your land, that you're an American. They want to normalize that concept in your mind. So that's the only reason why they do the holiday. The thing happened hundreds of years ago, and they just have the holiday as a propaganda mechanism. Every holiday they have here, Veterans Day, 4th of July, they're all propaganda mechanisms. So they have their institutions. So we need our own institutions that are designed to uplift our people. So the party taught me that. And we have them. We have Pan-African Women's Day. We have African Liberation Day. We have all of the events we do. And I think for Shukura and I, we were just talking like, what could we do when the pandemic started? And we thought, this would be a good way to use technology to start a program that we could have consistently that could put out an analysis of what's happening with our people and with justice-loving people all over the world. And when we first started it, it was in, like April of 2020. I was thinking, well, we'll do this for a few weeks. None of us at that time knew how long the pandemic would be. So I was thinking we'll do this for a few weeks and then we'll see what happens. And I thought by the summer, we would probably move on to something else. But even as the, people's reality in terms of how they engage the pandemic is shifting, we still see, people still tune into the program. People still want the program, so we continue to do it. And now, this Sunday, we've done it every week. It'll be our 137th episode. And it's just that. It's an institution. It's a way, like the Pantsula podcast here, like the Pan-African News Show on Thursdays, the Forward Ever podcast, that all of these different programs that A-APRP people are doing, I think are wonderful forms of propaganda. We have to do the in-person work as well, of course, but these are good ways for people to tune in and get an understanding of what we're trying to do. And so, we both have talked about it numerous times. We're committed to doing it for as long as it's relevant.
Yes, I would just humbly add on. I think that we are committed to doing it as long as it's relevant. And then also, I'm just very grateful that we can use these different streams of technology to reach people in different ways based on different people's learning styles, right? And so, for some of us, asynchronously, that works better for our lifestyle. So what I really appreciate about all of these streams and platforms is that you don't have to necessarily join them when they're being recorded, because a lot of comrades have reached out to us and said, I just need to listen to this to get through my slave day. And so like asynchronously listening to it on a Monday when we're not recording on that Monday, right? Or I purposely turned on my camera today because some folks might be able to understand me better by reading my lips as I'm speaking, right? There's some people who are visual, other people are audio. And so I just really appreciate that, because some of the information we're sharing, it can be a lot if you've never heard it before. And so just trying to have multiple ways to read it and listen to it, reinforcing the message, right? Playing it once, processing, and then listening to it again while you pick up the Handbook of Revolutionary Warfare, like all of these different ways for the message to come to you a different way, I think is going to be really critical in Africans understanding that we have a responsibility to get our land back. And we also have a responsibility to help other folks who are colonized get their land back too, because their oppressors are affecting us and our oppressors are affecting them. And I think just being able to get more information and again, increasing our political education is going to be really key with being able to do that. The last thing I'll say, Jam, is that I also think my dad was actually really brave to start our ancestors' voices by himself. And he just mentioned to me one day that he was doing it. And I was like, oh, I want to listen, because I'm just sitting on my couch all day expressing depression and different things during this global pandemic. And so I just need something as an outlet. And what I'd come to realize is it was really awesome to be able to join it. And he asked me to join one day. And I was like, oh no, I'm worried I'm going to let the people down or let you down or make a mistake. And that's when he encouraged me to understand, basically there's no mistakes when you're doing this kind of work. And you might make mistakes, don't misconstrue my words. But what I mean is, because you're intentionally trying to do something to help the masses of people, you're probably going to make mistakes, because I don't know if you've ever done it before, but I haven't. This is my first time in my life doing this. So I'm still learning and I'm going to make mistakes. But it would be better to try something and make mistakes than to sit on your behind and ignore all the problems that exist because you're too afraid to even step out. And so I think, when I joined him, that's when I started really enforcing the learnings that I was taking from work study. And B, I would also say that my dad said it, but I'll just say it again. For a lot of people, Pantsula podcast, Revolutionary African Personality, for whatever podcast, this is people's literal saving grace. Literally, like this is their spiritual, what do you call it? Their spiritual calling. There's another word for it. I can't think of it now, but ministry. This is their spiritual ministry. This is how they literally navigate through the world every day, is hearing this. And I can't tell you how many increases of party signups and work study we have had because of these podcasts, because of these streamlines, because people are never, ever, ever going to cross paths with us in person. But anybody who has an IP address and has a consistent bill paying process would have access to be able to hear these streams. So I think that's critical, because it's all about reaching people and getting the information out there so that we can unlearn and resist all the nonsense rhetoric BS that currently exists.
There it is. So now we get to what the episode is about: revolutionary parenting. So my guess is that most parents, save examples of extreme abuse, would say they're doing their best to raise children in a way that's protective, in a way that is positive, and these same folks are using methods to teach right from wrong. You know, obviously right and wrong in some cases would be subjective, but there are definite rights and wrongs. You know, teaching your child to be compassionate, teaching your child to stand up for what is right, you know, morally and all of these things. So there are definite lines. But I want to ask you, Ahjamu, what have you and others who partake in revolutionary parenting, what is different from your typical parenting?
Mm-hmm. And I really appreciate that question a whole lot, Jamilah, because this is not something, you know, over the years, I haven't talked about this much at all. And the reason why I don't talk about it is, you know, if they haven't been engaged in child rearing, they may not really understand, you know, what this is about. And the people who raise children, people get very defensive when you talk about, you know, the quote unquote positive and correct ways to raise children. So it's not really a topic that, you know, that there's a clear pathway to venture into. So I haven't really talked about it as much as I should talk about it. So I appreciate the opportunity to say something about it now. And I think I would just say, I would just give, you know, Shukura's mom a ton of credit. I give myself that credit because it is not easy to make a decision to raise a child in this society with principles and values of justice. It is not easy. Nobody is your friend. Nobody supports you when you say, I'm not lying to my child. I'm telling, there's no fat white man that's bringing her presents on December 24th. You know, that's a white supremacist fantasy. Nobody's your friend when you say that. You know, no, your family doesn't support you when you say, you know, we don't celebrate Thanksgiving. You know, they don't support that. You know, you tell them this stuff, they want to give them presents anyway. You try to explain, we're not, you know, they tell you, well, you're denying her. She's going to be scarred for life. You know, this is the kind of stuff even my own parents said to me, you know, as she was a child. So it is not easy. And then, you know, we had standards. We set a bar and we really tried to stick to it. You know, we would talk to her teachers in school constantly. We would talk to them and we would tell them, like, these are our values. Like, she doesn't say no pledge of allegiance to an empire. She doesn't do that. We don't, you know, I remember Shukura came right after 9/11. Shukura came to the house and I went to pick her up and she was upset. And she would, you know, I asked her and she, you know, didn't want to talk about it. She said, you know, it's not a big, she tried to, you know, I'm not really, everything's fine. And I knew it wasn't fine. So finally, later in the evening, talking to her some more, she said that she had a substitute teacher that had come into class and railed against the Palestinian people after 9/11 and how they should all be bombed and killed. And that upset Shukura because Shukura had grown up going to events sponsored by the Palestinian community where they, you know, they had us there as guests. You know, she had been exposed, so she knew, you know, she wasn't operating from ignorance like a lot of folks unfortunately are. So she knew that was wrong and she understood the analysis about it, at least on some level she did as a child. So, you know, we had to go up there and confront this teacher, and, you know, you don't want any friends doing that kind of stuff either. So this was our life, you know, it was constant like that. You know, we would everything we did was a ceremony. Every phase of life was a ceremony. When Shukura had her rites of passage at 16, we had a whole program with, I don't know, Shukura, about 80 people. And we did a rites of passage we did a very wonderful African cultural ceremony. When she graduated from high school, same thing. When she graduated from college, same thing. You know, everything is an institution and it's not easy. But, you know, even yesterday, like, we had a bunch of people, you know, came over here to eat and we did a ceremony. We did a libation and we did land acknowledgement to the indigenous people. And Shukura joined via Zoom because explaining to the people, for most of them, it was their first time. People loved it. You know, it was a house full of people. People loved it. It was their first time, you know, hearing it, but they wanted to. We had an elder here who lives here part of the week, and she's going to be 89, and she had never heard anything like that, you know, and she contributed to the libation, you know, and was honored and happy, and Shukura did that and gave her respect. And this is our culture, and we're trying to share this with our people. And so we did the best we could as Shukura grew up to do that. And I just want to make the point, it is not, you have to make a concerted effort every day. It is not easy, and you will make a ton of mistakes, and people will not, people will give you the hardest time. I'll just, one last thing to illustrate it. Like, there was one child that grew up with Shukura who had a dad that wasn't, at that time, I don't know what he is now, but at that time, he wasn't consistent with picking up his child. And so as a result of that, the mother made sure that she would enroll her child wherever Shukura was, so that she could have us as a backup to pick her up, because she worked odd hours. And so we would do that. So one time he came to our house to pick his daughter up, and we were, at that time, we always had a map. See, there's a map behind me right now. Shukura can tell you, as long as she's grown up, we've had world maps of Africa, and we educated around that. And we, people being ignorant and dumb about the world they live in. So we addressed that. And so we were doing that with his child, and he came in, and so I don't want my child learning your beliefs. That's what he said to me when he came to pick up his child. And I said, well, okay, partner, this is the easy resolution to the problem. I said, because I don't have to worry about my child being exposed to your backward beliefs. Do you know why? He's like, no. I'm like, because you don't have any access to my child. The only reason why I have access to your child is because you're not responsible in picking her up. So if you don't want your child, if your child is in our house, your child is going to be exposed to what we do in our house. And if you don't like that, get your you-know-what together and be responsible with your child. That doesn't win you any friends, talking to people like that. But this is how we tried to do it, so that we could be consistent. Because what was important to us is we didn't want our daughter being exposed to a lot of nonsense. We didn't want her. I remember when she was 12, she wanted to straighten her hair. It was peer pressure. She wanted to straighten her hair. And to be honest, I was not, it was not, I didn't understand, like, Shukura's mom was militant. Like, no way, that's not going to happen. And I didn't really understand. I was like, well, she wants to, whatever. And she was like, militant, you need to support me. I'm like, okay, I'm down. So, this 3 years, it was every time Shukura, I want to get my hair straight. She'd bring me pictures. I don't even know if you remember that. She'd bring me pictures of straight hair. This is why she'd leave the pictures out. And we didn't cave in. And eventually, by the time she was like 14, 15, she, got past that. And now her hair is beautifully natural for her life. But it's not easy. You're not going to be popular. And people are going to talk about you, and they're going to give you a hard time when you try to live your life with your children with principles. And that is the reason why I think most people just give in. I've had people tell me, I didn't want to go through all that. So I just relented. The family took her for Christmas, and I just let them do it. People have told me that. And we're not willing to do that. We would say, she can go to your house, but this is how it has to be. Otherwise, no, we don't want that. And I think that she turned out fine. In fact, I think a whole lot more of us could turn out fine if we stopped going along with all this nonsense.
Jamilah, I am not a parent, but I do have humble things to add, if that is okay.
No, go ahead, because my next question is for you, but please add.
Okay, thank you. I was just going to say that I think that my dad did a wonderful job, and I think that this is why consistency, this is why commitment to principles, this is why that's really, really important. Because the other part of it is you have constant reminders in our society where if you don't know who you are, capitalism will flip you over and make you think you are a duck or a goose if you allow them to do that. And I'm not exaggerating. I truly, truly mean that. And so he's right. When I was 16, I did have a rites of passage, but what he may not remember and may not have wanted to share with you all is that this is a constant struggle, even in our household, right? With two organizers who are in global organizations working for justice for African people everywhere. I walked up to my mom and I said, I want to have a quinceañera. Because even when we think about African culture, we're not thinking about how it is completely dismissed. We're not thinking about how it is dehumanized. We're not thinking about how it is not popular to be African, right? And so I think that in my confusion as a 16-year-old who wanted to straighten her hair and who wanted to have a quinceañera, those two things would go together, because I'm not understanding that I don't need to do what somebody else is doing. I need to be okay with who I am. But that's what white supremacy will teach you, is that you need to be second guessing that constantly, right? And so my mom responded to me and said, we're not doing that. You're going to have an African rites of passage. And I was like, huh, what a rude thing to say. But in reality, it was obviously the best experience ever. And here's the thing, my dad also left out, yes, we had a rites of passage. I had an opportunity to have people give me a pebble, and they were giving me wisdom, a song that they loved, and each time they would say something with the pebble and drop it in, and that part was beautiful. There were pictures, we were all wearing white, it was beautiful. But we also don't want you all to think that we don't understand that you don't need to have fun just because you're a revolutionary. And so we hired a really popular DJ who was really, really big at that time in Sacramento. And I was really excited to get to that part of the party because I wanted to dance with my friends. And
it wasn't cheap either.
Yeah, no, it was not cheap. And we had a caterer that was expensive. It was a lot. But my point is, it's important to continue to be consistent with teaching those kind of values to your children, because no, your goal is not to make them feel alienated and to make them feel like there's something wrong with them. Your goal is to remind them that they have a responsibility to make a difference. And the best way that you can teach them that is by infusing in them as much as possible who they are and helping them to see the contradictions, while also trying to navigate in this capitalist space while still not losing who you are. All three of us just talked about how we were owning things or had purchased things that we weren't really proud of. But again, it's how you use those things. And I would argue, even when you're raising your child, how are you using the resources that capitalism has stolen so that you can still make a difference for colonized people?
So one of the things that you mentioned and was talking about it in a way, looking at the raising of a child. I think a lot of people don't necessarily look at something as long term. And so in terms of particular instances, so you wanting to get your hair straightened, you know, some folks might say, okay, it's just easier for me because your hair's hard to comb or whatever. And so those are short-term things. And I think, you know, capitalism looks at the short term. It's sort of a short-term satisfaction. So you have stocks, you have all of these things, but there is a particular end goal with capitalism, but it's usually short run. So it's like we want instantaneous profits. So in the long run, we want those profits, but we're going to do things that are instantaneous, and it's not going to be steady. It's not going to be a sustainable economy, for instance. It's not going to be a sustainable social system. So how people may raise a child is they'll do things instantaneously because it looks easier for now. But raising a child in a principled way is a long-term thing that is really hard. And as you said, Ahjamu, you don't necessarily win friends, but we have to think about raising a child as like, this person is going to end up as either a principled or reactionary person, either someone that's revolutionary or liberal or whatever. And we have to really see what that means. And so your mother saying, no, you're not going to get your hair straightened. No, you're not going to have a quinceañera. Like, we're going to have something that's printable in an African structure. In the long run, look where you are now. So I think it's really important that anyone who raises a child as a parent, as a guardian, or someone who is a caretaker of a child needs to understand that nothing is permanent. And yes, you have a child in your life for a particular number of years in terms of raising them, but that doesn't stop just because they're out of the house. Like the principles remain because of what they've learned as someone coming up, because children are sponges. So these particular values stay with you. And so if you are in an abusive household, if you are in a reactionary household, yes, the child might either act in the opposite end, or they might directly repeat those behaviors, but it's still a response or reaction to something. And if you do not give a child a particular set of values, it's just like, oh, you just do what you want. No. So the question I do want to ask you, Shukura, is you were a child who grew up with revolutionary parents who organized with the A-APRP. So what would be some experiences you could share and some lessons you've taken with you as an adult?
Wow. Yeah, so I would say I was thinking about this as you were talking, and I was thinking, oh, I should have said this in my last response, but now I can say it in this response because it's appropriate and it works. But I think you were saying like lessons that I have taken as a young person into adulthood. I think more than anything, understanding that it is okay to admit how quadruply oppressed I am as a cis African woman, right? And being confident in saying I am African, having those conversations when I meet people, when I'm on dating apps, like legit, my profile says, you know, I work against resisting systems of oppression as an African person. I'm not African American, like all these different things, right? And of course, they're conversation starters, and for a lot of people, they can't handle it, and that's okay. That's one of the unpopular things about committing to your principles, but I am who I am, and I'm unapologetic about that. And I know that the right person will not be scared when I tell them that, because deep down they probably believe it too. They just don't know how to access that, right? So I think that that would be one of these key pieces, is being able to openly identify how I identify, and being aware of how these different intersections of how I identify, how they can affect me and other people like me, because we are oppressed, right, in this world. It also helps that my parents prioritized taking me home twice. Okay. And so I think that's really, really key, because for a lot of us, I don't want to say we can talk the talk but not walk the walk, but really, like, without theory there's no practice, and without practice there's no theory. So if you do consider yourself a revolutionary person, I would really encourage you, if you haven't already taken your child home, because America is not their home, I would strongly encourage you to do the best you can. I know it's expensive, but life is an investment, and we invest in things that appreciate all the time. Going home is always going to appreciate your value, your ideological consciousness. More than anything, it's going to give you foundational baseline to help you understand this is who you are. Because the moment you get off the plane, the treatment is going to be very different from the treatment you get when you touch down into the States. And the two times that I've been, when I was 4, I went to Accra, Ghana. When I was 16, we went to Dakar, Senegal. Those trips have truly fueled my resistance for wanting to leave the US every moment that I get. So as much as I can travel outside, that's what I'm doing. I would argue that is definitely a tactic that I've taken as a child into my adulthood. Any chance that I get. When I was an undergrad, I told my dad, I said, there's an opportunity for me to study abroad in Costa Rica. You know, how do you feel about that? And he was like, anywhere outside of the US, I'm down. I said the same thing to my mom, and she was like, yeah, we can help you apply for scholarships and things so you can be able to pay for it, because I don't have the money to send you. But yeah, I support you. Let's do it. Let's figure it out. And so I think just having those experiences, being able to go to different places. And here's the case in point. When you travel outside of the US, first of all, it humbles you, because you're able to see other people that look like you. And then you start to understand. That's why they call it the transatlantic slave trade, because we literally are everywhere. Okay. First of all. Second of all, then you start to get a better understanding of just how miraculous we are. Because, for example, when you go to a place like Cuba, or when you go to a place like Costa Rica, and you see someone who is African, but they speak 7 languages, whereas you only speak English, and you understand in that moment English does not matter anymore, that's when it really starts to become crystal clear for you, because you have to really dig into yourself and be like, our people are amazing. That we literally have just been dropped everywhere, and we still have managed to survive. We have managed to build lives for ourselves. We have managed to help and give back. We have managed to do all of these things. That's when it really starts to become clear for you. And so I think traveling is very important. I think that is so important, because if you don't know who you are, the best way that you can address that is going home. And Kwame Ture can talk to you about that. When he was confused, he needed to understand that. So I think that traveling, I think having your parents be in an organization, and then that organization having some type of youth component. So I was a member of the Young Pioneers Institute, YPI. That also greatly contributed to who I am today. YPI was such an awesome experience because as children, whether we were in diapers or toddlers or whether we were walking with our moms, we were still in a position where we had to sing songs that promoted these institutions that we need as African people. So we had the alphabet song, and it wasn't the ABC. It was A is for Africa, the land of our home. B is for the bravery, which our people have shown. My mom and I sang it the other day, and there were like 24 letters that I couldn't remember. But my plan is to rewrite it and dictate it back out because we are resuscitating YPI from a virtual standpoint. But more to come on that. Anyway, so yeah, so my point is being exposed to things like that. We had coloring activities where we had the continent of Africa, Marcus Garvey, Amy Jocks Garvey, and we had to color these people in where we had to learn them and write their names and understand who they were and what they had done. Also, the biggest piece I want to say is with YPI, there was no gendered roles with YPI. That's the biggest thing I remember, is that there were different folks, regardless of what their pronouns are or how they identified, who would take shifts and come and watch after the children. And so it wasn't just non-men people who were there, it was men people as well. And so again, like just taking all these pieces and taking them to build to who I am today. I think that's the biggest piece. And then the last thing I wanted to say is that just continuing to risk being unpopular. So all the animals that I have ever owned in my life, they have all had African names because I am an African and my animals are an extension of me. And I'm very proud of that, even to the tune of now, when I go to the dog park, the Europeans say, what kind of name is that? And I'm like, well, it's an African name because I'm African. I have an African name. My dog is an extension of me. So she's going to have an African name too. And now you're like actively resisting white supremacy at this dog park, right? Because then later you see the Europeans again and they're like, well, that's Bisa. That's West African and it means greatly loved. And I'm like, good for you, Bill. You were listening. Good for you. Good. Yeah. And your dog is Rover over there running around in the mud. Yes. So I think that just committing to principles, I think that's really key, and knowing who you are and going home as much as possible. If not home, any place that is not America. Just leaving, staying as long as you can, keeping your passport updated. And instead of investing in, I don't know, a car, like, yeah, invest in that, but also put some money aside for the passport. Never, ever, ever let the passport expire, because that's going to be key to you still connecting back to the motherland, or at least something that advances you and your people.
Yes, indeed. I actually wanted to get back to what your experiences have been in a revolutionary family situation, and you talked about patriarchy. I wanted to focus a little bit on that, in addition to other ways you have struggled in a revolutionary family structure under this capitalist system.
Jamilah, I'm hoping I'm answering this along the lines of what you were looking for. So just tell me if I'm off target. But I think, just having a better understanding of me talking more and more openly with both my mom and my dad about positionality and about how African women are triply oppressed, and just really, really digging into that. I'm proud to say that my mom has always taken that approach with me, and my dad has too. But when I was younger, I didn't really receive it the way I'm receiving it now. And so it's really crazy how you can hear the same message over and over and over, but I'm internalizing it now because now I'm seeing it as a young woman who is dating, right? And seeing the actual patriarchy. And sometimes if I'm not sure, I'll take that scenario and share it with my parents and then ask them, is this patriarchy? And then they'll confirm, yes, it is. And so then we have a better understanding, just so we could call it, right? Let's call a spade a spade. So I think that that's been really interesting. I remember when my mom had the chance to go to Cuba, she talked to me about how they were visiting some construction site and there were nothing but non-male construction workers building up some building in Havana. And what they had to do was, most of them had children that they did not have care for. And so the construction workers communicated with the property manager, we need to stop working on this project and we actually need to build a daycare center. We already have somebody that we can hire. We have a budget in it for the payroll. We need to build this daycare so that our children have a place to go where they can be safe. And then we'll come back to building this building. And of course, in Cuba, people are actually seen from a humanistic standpoint. So the property manager understood, yeah, your kids need to have a safe place for them to go. Like, you're not going to be able to focus on work if your kid is running around with hammers and scissors, right? And so they were able to do that. And I'll never forget that story, because that just meant so much to me in terms of prioritizing the many, many responsibilities that non-male people need to think about. I even think about Sojourner Truth and how, as contradictory as she may have been, she did her part to try to advance our people, specifically as she was traveling through southern states. And when she had just recently given birth, she was nursing her child on the road, giving her speeches. And I think about those kind of things and just the kind of decisions that non-male people have to make on a day-to-day basis. This also brings me to like this idea of what safety looks like, right? In terms of just having conversations and people respecting you when you say, you know, no, I'm not interested in talking anymore. And then people still not respecting those boundaries, whatever that may look like. And so I think that there are a lot of different ways that I could continue to answer this question, Jamilah, but I think for now, I'm just going to say I need Africans everywhere and any colonized person, if you're watching this, to understand that we're not just going to be able to get rid of white supremacy when we organize. We're not just going to get rid of capitalism when we organize. Those are not the evils that are only evils. Patriarchy is one of the biggest and oldest evils. And I think that everybody everywhere, whether you identify as a man, if you're non-binary, if you identify as a cis woman, all of us need to understand that system does not help any of us. It does not help any of us. And I challenge you to really think about it. I give these examples because I teach classes, right? And so I talk about patriarchy in my classes because I need students to understand you have a responsibility to make the world better. And so again, I'm not a parent myself, but I do feel like these students have been put in my class by whatever higher power. And I feel like it's my responsibility to make them better than how they came to me. And I know no other teacher is talking to them the way I am, but my job is to educate them. I talk about Cuba all the time in my classes because none of them will never even go to Cuba. But they need to understand from a public health standpoint, that is the best example that we can use, regardless of what you think about what you don't know, because the media lies to you every day. And so I think just using different examples like that to talk about how Cuba is helping students to understand what LGBTQ language and curriculum needs to look like because they're incorporating that in their classrooms. But by the same token, just having these different conversations of what it means to be harassed if you're a non-male person, what it means to live in a world where you have to fear whether or not you can go jogging. I think it's really critical to have those kind of conversations. And I'm really lucky because between my mom and my dad, they've never made me feel a certain way about communicating certain things like that. You know, I've had situations where I needed to file sexual harassment suits and I was able to talk to both of them and say, is this me? Because patriarchy will teach you that you are the problem, even though you're the victim. And I remember not only from my mom, but especially my dad, like helping me to really understand that from a male's perspective, right? And helping me to understand. So I'm not the problem here. And he was like, no, he needs to have more control. That's the problem. And the problem is you feel like you're the problem because he's okay with you being the problem when he knows he's really doing something wrong. Like you have to really unpack that. And again, like that's the problem when patriarchy is a system, right? That means for years and generations, it has been drilling into people that it's okay to mistreat someone who does not have power because they identify as a man. And that's problematic for thousands of reasons. It's problematic. So I think calling it out and doing the best we can to organize against it and not just looking at capitalism as the problem is going to be key for that.
Just the discussion that a lot of people are afraid of, talking about, you know, what people call the birds and the bees, or, you know, just a conversation around consent. That's, I don't know how common that is, honestly, in general, because people seem to be afraid to even discuss with their children around the issues of relationships, romantic relationships, etc. So as a person coming from a revolutionary parenting background, how do you discuss consent? How do you discuss these issues with your child? And just the question that was posed before, just navigating and resisting patriarchy as a revolutionary parent.
Yeah, you know, I always try to start from the standpoint of our ideology, right, in the A-APRP. That should drive everything we do. And, you know, and Crewmism, Toureism is based on dialectical and historical materialism. So that means everything happens for a reason and there's a cause and an effect to everything. So, you know, material truth and justice and material reality should always be the same. And of course, in this capitalist society, they're almost never the same. And so the question of consent to me is best understood and explained that way. So if you remember when we were doing our school of African roots in Portland, like we talked with the kids about consent there. And a lot of like where I was coming from with that lesson plan was what I was able to put in practice with Shukura. And that was that, again, truth and justice and material reality. Your body belongs to you. So you have a right to determine what happens to your body on any and all levels. So it's not, if you approach it like that, it's no longer can be, well, he said this or he did that. That's irrelevant. The point is that, the truth is this is your body, and everything else is either aligns with that or it doesn't. And so that's what, that's how we approach all of those things. And then another part of that is you have to, a lot of us, we have these problems because we don't address things. We try to do everything we can to avoid conflict. And again, I don't, a dialectical and historical materialist analysis is essential here. Conflict is a part of life. You can't get around conflict. The best thing you can do is learn how to work through conflict. And so I've never understood that. Like people are like, well, I have this conversation with people my age. I've had it for years. I don't let my children do that. And I'm like, well, it doesn't matter. They're going to do it. They're going to go to somebody else's house and watch it or hear it or whatever. You think you raise your children, you're with your children 10, 15 minutes a day. What the other 23 hours and 45 minutes, your children are out here in the capitalist system, and it is doing what it does with all of us. So to me, you have to just face that. You can't be in some kind of fantasy world about that happening. You have to face that. And so you just sit down and tell the truth. And we tried to do that. We tried to talk about things with Shukura as it related to every aspect of her life, getting pregnant, birth control. People, how could you talk to her about that? How could you not talk to your child about that? That was our perspective. I just don't understand how anyone could choose being ignorant and pretending something exists over providing someone with a quality education about the issue so they understand it properly. That's the problem in this society. Everything is the first thing I described, but pretend it doesn't exist. That's why we have so many problems, because people don't know how to address real life, staring them in the face, slapping them in the jaw. They don't know what to do with that because they never learned skills about how to address reality. So that's our school of thought on that.
Thank you. And you get to what I wanted to ask next, was about how revolutionary family structure takes in media, how utilizing anti-imperialist and anti-capitalist analysis frames how you look at media. So what have been some effective ways in guiding a child towards recognizing disinformation and fabrication? And two examples, of course, the Black Panther films or the Malcolm X film, or, there are plenty of examples, but I think you mentioned on either last episode or episode before that, you went to see the last Black Panther movie. So, of course, people are crying about that or praising the movie just as they praise the other one. But how do you teach as a revolutionary parent? What ways do you teach, outside? I know that we have the structure of the A-APRP, but what are some other things people can use who are not organizing with the A-APRP or other revolutionary organizations?
So that is actually a perfect example of what I was just saying. So I know, like with Shukura, what we tried to do was, again, address things and not try to pretend like they didn't exist. So I don't remember Shukura who it was, but I remember someone like in the 90s, one of the popular so-called gangster hip hop artists had a popular song, and this is what we would do all the time. Like, we would play the song, like we would set up appointment, we would sit down, we would play the song, or we would watch a movie and we would talk about it. We would have a discussion about it. That's what we would do. We would talk about it. And I think that's the way you have to properly address those types of things. She's going to hear the song or see the movie somewhere, and if you try to act like she can't do it, she's going to find a way to do it. He is, and they are too. So our approach was to disarm all of that by just addressing it head on and saying, okay, here's the song. Now let's talk about why this is problematic. let's talk about why it was. I don't remember what it was, but we had a wonderful conversation about how, like, if Tupac's music, because that's what it would have been back then, somebody like that, Tupac, Dr. Dre, Snoop Dogg, and we didn't listen to that music in the house, but it was all around us. And you know, I'm not stupid. I know it's heard everywhere. So we would address it and say, so if someone can hear a song by Dr. Dre, and I'm not advocating Dr. Dre, I think he's garbage, but I'm saying if someone can hear a song by Dr. Dre and go out and kill somebody based on that song, then what do you think is happening when they watch, you know, at that time, the Arnold Schwarzenegger Terminator movie? Like, he talks about killing 2 or 3 people in a 5-minute song. Arnold Schwarzenegger in a 3-hour movie kills hundreds of people, and people can see him doing it. So we'd have conversations like that. You know, all of it is coming from the same place. It's about making money and prioritizing profit over people. So they don't care what impacts it has on people. So we would talk about all these things. I again, for the life of me, I don't understand why people, if you don't know how to have those conversations, you need to learn. You need to put in the time to learn. There's many of us out here that will help you do it. But this tactic of thinking you can just avoid reality and it's going to turn out okay, how is that working out for us?
Yeah. Shukura, how do you think that has helped you in terms of how you interpret media through an anti-imperialist, anti-capitalist analysis?
Yeah, thank you for asking that, Jam. I think that so my dad and I actually saw the second Black Panther on the same day, but he and I have yet to actually talk about it and discuss. But I remembered sitting in the theaters, and of course I'm very critical, right? So I was like, no, okay. First of all, like my thing is, I have appreciated being able to have this foundation of being able to openly ask questions, not being shunned when I did ask questions and whatnot, because that allowed me to not be afraid of seeking information, which I think is really, really important, because a lot of folks, whether they mean to or not, I think they're teaching their children indirectly, maybe, that it's okay to be ignorant. And if you don't know something, something is wrong with you. When, how are you going to know everything when the system keeps everything from you and lies to you constantly? So I think that has been very instrumental in helping me to ask these kind of questions, but it's also allowed me to be critical of everything. And, if you listen to any of the media that the party is putting out, then you have heard us say consistently that you should always be critical. You should always raise questions. You should always try to flag things and better understand things, because it's a pretty safe assumption that whatever's being presented to you is not based on truth or humanity, right? And so I think, just thinking about just different examples of trying to understand, okay, how is this, what part of this story is being left out? What part of this is not really true? Well, I know when I read Ghana, Cape Coast, I know that this was said this way, but yet I'm seeing this portrayed this way, even though this is the woman king and it's not based in Ghana. I know the da-da-da-da. And so just trying to connect those things. I also had those conversations with my friends, because we all went to the theaters together, and, none of them are in organizations. So I kept that in mind as I was talking to them, but we still were highlighting some of the contradictions, not just with this movie, but with other ones, right? And so I think that that's always going to be really important. Also, for what it's worth, I think it's important to go see the film, right? Because you can't critique it unless you have collected the data to be able to look at it. And so being open to go see it, investing in capitalist dollars so that you can see it, and then having a critical lens to be able to say that wasn't true, or that wasn't based on truth, or that was actually inhumane for them to demonstrate that way. And that's not how African people really operate. And then I think just being able to have more conversations around that. And I would say, not just relying on visual media, but actually relying on concrete evidence from some of our ancestors who have already wrote about these things and published books on them. Because again, you have to increase your political education, I would argue, from the horse's mouth, for lack of a better term. And so that means picking up these books that have been published and are available for free as PDF versions, so that you can really start to better understand it. You can always read something and then look at the media perception of it, but I think it's dangerous if you just look at a visual media and you're not really hearing from the people who have done the work what some of the circumstances are, or how to address the problems that they were facing back in their time and we're still facing today. You asked earlier, how does my childhood upbringing transcend into adulthood? And this connects with patriarchy as well. But I would also just say I've continued to be very critical about what kind of legacy I want to leave when I do get married. And I think that it's important to continue to think about how, like, the whole system of patriarchy is a system of oppression, and this idea of non-male people being ownership and property in terms of taking on the person's name, which to me is a similar analogy to Africans taking on the slave master's name. And so I've talked in great detail to my dad about that and how I feel about it, and how I'm not interested in participating in that. And I still think that that's only because I've been given the tools that my parents chose to take when they joined the organization Working for Justice. And then we're able to share those examples with me. And again, it's only because I'm old enough where I'm actually thinking about how it's going to affect me that I'm starting to understand it. Because, you know, for years, I didn't understand why my mom didn't take my dad's name, right? And they had to explain it to me time and time again. But now I'm like, wow, I am the only natural Umi. Like, that's the biggest thing, is like they both changed their names, but I was naturally born as this. I'm not going to drop this name for some man who I don't even know, and God forbid may not even be married to after 2 years. You know what I mean? So it's just like that. But that's why you have to know who you are, though. That's why you have to know who you are, and that's why you have to be proud and stand by who you are, because the system will make you feel like there's something wrong with you if your name is not African. But the fact that your name is African connects you closer to the continent, which means you have a better understanding of navigating through this nonsense, because you actually can connect back to who you are. I would never drop my name. Not now that I know what I know, never. So I just wanted to say that. So maybe a hyphen, but that's only if he has an African name, because I'm not going to add Umi Johnson. That would be crazy. So yes.
Oh, yes, indeed. So I want to get back to the hair thing for a moment, but this is, again, another question where I'd like to hear more examples. So there are situations where a child of revolutionary parents, they ideologically separate in some fashion, whether it's minimal or they just go all the way reactionary. So are there examples that you've encountered where that's happened, Ahjamu? And then is that something you've ever considered, Shukura?
In terms of just people, how people respond to like the hair question, or
no, just in general, where there may be a child who was raised in the A-APRP and then they decided to ideologically separate, or just any other revolutionary organization.
Got it.
Yeah.
I mean, that's a really good question too, because I've seen that, just in all my time in the party, I've seen a lot of that. I've seen people who, Kwame Ture used to say, you want to be a bonfire, you don't want to be a brush fire. You want to burn long and consistently. You don't want to burn hot, fast, and burn out quick. And I always think about that because I've seen that happen so many times, not just with the children, but also with the people, and people have a lot of, my position is African people particularly, and indigenous people and other colonized, oppressed people, poor people. There's a lot of trauma in our day-to-day existence. So what people end up doing is trying to find different ways to numb that trauma. So sometimes that might be, I'm active in the struggle, I support the struggle for a few years, and then you see them a few years later and they're, born again Christians. I've seen a lot of that kind of stuff, or they're born again capitalists or whatever it is. I've just seen that happen a lot. And that's reaffirmed for me, is the constant necessity of political education. I mean, you have to constantly be engaged in a process to reaffirm who you are as a person and what your values are. You can't think, I understand that, I'm good, I don't need to do that anymore. You can never be that arrogant to assume that, because George Padmore said correctly, revolutionary at 20, moderate at 30, conservative at 40, and reactionary at 50. And that's true. The capitalist system works on you. The older you get, now you start, I should have had this. I should have had this house. I should have had this kind of car. I should have this. And those are not the things that what you have to use to evaluate yourself is, what values do you have and how do you enact those values with people in society? How do you interact with people in society? What are you doing to contribute to the world? That's how we need to learn how to value ourselves. So that's just, you know, a real challenge in a capitalist society like this, is that people go in all kind of directions and will treat you like there's something wrong with you for being consistent. You know, like I see people all the time I started out with in the party, and I'm not judging them, but they will attack me. Like, you're still doing that? And I'm like, yeah, I mean, you last time I saw you, you were this religion, now you're that religion. You used to be down for the struggle, and you're criticizing me. I've been consistent for decades. Like, there's something wrong with that? Like, we don't know what you're going to be until we see you the next time, you know? So that's a problem to me of political education. You have to constantly be engaging in that process, because for me, it's like it reaffirms, you know, why I am the person I am. You know, like yesterday, Thanksgiving, I watched Incident at Ogalla, you know, and I do things like that on all these backward reactionary holidays. It's just a way to reaffirm who we are, you know, and it did do that. You know, it always does. You know, if you haven't seen that, you should see it. It's the story of how Leonard Peltier was framed for these two police Gestapo FBI agents that went on the Pine Ridge Reservation in 1976. I'm always reading a book. We have our cadre circle reading, but I always have another book on top of that I'm reading, you know, always trying to keep my mind active. And as Shukura said, be in a position to interpret what's happening and not just go along with the stream. So I think that's why that happens, because people don't, you know, the capitalist system works on us 24/7, 365 days. So if you don't have something combating that 24/7, 365 days, it'll eventually get the best of you.
That's
a great
facts
point.
right there. Okay, that's facts. I was really thinking, Jamilah, and I think I've come close to straying away, but I don't think I would ever sell out. I want to say that. And then I think even when I came close, I still worked harder to go to the other extreme, and to work even harder to continue to push the consistency that I had been taught. And I could give you two examples of both. So, you know, when I go to sporting events or whatnot, my parents aren't there to protect me and say, you know, you really can stay seating when the national anthem gets sung. And so I've been in certain spaces where I've gone to basketball games or things like that, where the social pressure gets to me, and I will stand, but I've never put my hand over my heart, and I've definitely never mouthed the words. And when I hear what they're saying, my dad actually challenged me, and he said, you should really listen to the song. It's a very violent song. And so I've really, again, critical, right? So now I'm like just listening to it, and I'm like, bombs bursting. That means death. That means people dying. Like, why are we celebrating that? I've never understood that. So I think for me, like, it's thinking about that, and it's thinking about ways that I can continue to just still center colonized people, poor people, and Mother Africa, because those things have been forgotten about, right? But I'm also at a point now where I don't care. So when I do go to basketball games again, because I'm still not feeling safe around people, but eventually I'll get back to that, and I'm going to be masked up and continue to remain seating, because to stand now from a even more important level means that I'm still giving respect to this land. And the only respect I want to give is to the indigenous people. So I think still just risking being unpopular is going to be critical for a lot of people and key. I also would say on the other end of that, that's the closest that I've got to straying away. So now I'll give you an example of how I continue to overcompensate for staying where I need to be. And so, you know, like, I was raised not to use terms like home, right? Or if when we do say home, we're talking about Africa. So when we started the pandemic, I was telling people, you know, I'm working from my place. And it's like, that's a lot of words to say instead of just saying the other one. But this is not my home. This is an apartment that I give capitalist, imperialist communities money every month to keep a roof over my head. So yes, I am working from my place. And, you know, my friends would say, well, are you at home? And I'll say, well, I haven't gone to Africa lately. And then, oh, Shukura. Yeah, but it's true though. Like, we need to think about that. We need to really think about that. So I think that's critical. And then, you know, when people are like, well, is she Black? And I say, well, she's African descent. Yes. What? She's African descent. Why you say that? Because she descends from Africa. Isn't that the same thing as Black? Only it's a little bit more conscious leading than just saying Black. Black is the term that the colonizer gave us. We don't need to promote more language that they have given us. We need to go back to what we knew before it was unlearned and erased from our brains. and then it's a conversation damper, right? But I don't care, because I think that it's important for us to know who we are, like I said. So I think that that's really key. And I think that graduate school was so much fun for me, because I was able to just light those classes on fire with my analogies and my understandings because of everything that we've been taught. So yeah, little things like not saying home and things like that. And, like just being very conscious in the kind of language that we use. I can't think of any other examples right now, but I think that would be the best one. Just little things like that. So yeah, I hope that answered your question, Jamil.
Yes. And those are actually 3 things that I always struggle with people, with the home thing. And so, are you going home? I'm like, do you have a plane ticket for me? And they're like, what do you mean? I was like, we have this conversation every time. You should know at this point what I mean. Or the same thing, I say, people, are you going home? Like, I'm going to my house, that kind of stuff. So yeah, that I learned really quickly to not say home. And then yeah, just the African, just all of these things that are just, it just seems second nature to me to say. And so even when I'm at this point hearing Black, or it just sounds strange to say, or home or things like that. But yeah, when you say that, people roll their eyes and they go, but you know what I'm talking about. I was like, you know what I'm talking about too, respect. So yeah, it's interesting, the struggles that are had just with language. It's interesting how people say, well, you want me to respect your pronouns or whatever, but if you misgender them, they get mad. So I feel like obviously that's not the same thing, but just respecting, how we understand this is not our home. So how we use the language of home, like, respect that. And most people, because it's just a second nature to them to think of like where you live or where you were born as home. Like, no, identity is political to us. Where we are, our whatever space we're in is political to us. So the very least you can do is respect that. And so if you want to roll your eyes at me just always saying home is Africa, then that's your loss. But respect what I have to say, and respect the language that I prefer using. So it is very interesting. Yeah.
Yeah. And I think a lot of people at first glance hearing that, they're like, well, what does it really make that big of a difference? And it really does, because what you're doing is you're establishing your values and your principles, and you're making other people respect them, which you have every right to do. And the more you do that, the stronger you'll get in it. So that's the important point. That's why it's good to practice that. I've never stopped. I've continued. Like, well, can we meet tomorrow? Yeah. What time? Are you free at 2? No, I'm not free yet, but I can meet you at 2. I'm consistent with that, because I don't want myself to start normalizing, this language that suggests that nothing is really wrong, because that's the whole idea. And the enemy does it, like people, like this whole week, people, well, happy Thanksgiving. And then I say, well, I don't celebrate that. And they're like, oh, well, do you, well, I don't either. I meet with my family. I said, yeah, but you just said to me, happy Thanksgiving. You wouldn't have said that in June. So you're operating on the values that are coming from our enemies. Whether you know it or not, or admit it or not, is irrelevant. That's what you're doing. You wouldn't have said that in December, happy Thanksgiving. You've been trained and conditioned to say that. And the reason why you've been trained and conditioned to say that is because they want to perpetuate their values. And I'm not trying to do that. I'm not saying you can't eat and enjoy your people, but I'm not perpetuating their values to have a meal, So it's important. You have to assert that. So when we say, our home is Africa, we're trying to assert something of value. And if people don't like that, then, it's everybody does that. When you see people, a lot of people that are Christian, for example, you see them and how are you doing? I'm blessed and can't be stressed. They're asserting their values by doing that. So I'm not offended by that. I'm like, okay, that's them. That's where their world is. But when we do it, it's a problem, because what we're doing is challenging the status quo. You're not challenging anything by saying you're too blessed to be stressed. That's just your little individual fantasy world. But by calling Africa your home and refusing to call this country, then you're challenging the status quo. You're doing all that, and that's a threat to the system. Even if we don't recognize it, they do.
I actually had a conversation with someone yesterday when they went to visit their family, and I asked them, well, yeah, you went over there, but did you struggle with them over the fact that this is stolen land? They said, well, no, there's kids everywhere. I'm like, that's what we're doing. Kids everywhere. And then he said, well, if I were to do that, that's the same thing as not going. I'm like, it's sure, but you're still sending the same message. If you are there, struggle with them. And don't be liberal about it. If you believe something in a particular way, be strong about it and struggle, because how else are you going to progress? How else are you going to engage and really be upfront about it if you're not even going to engage with people you are close to? It doesn't, you're just going to live in relative comfort because you're scared to struggle with your family. Like, those are the people you need to struggle with before you go out and struggle with complete strangers. So yeah, I had this very conversation yesterday, and then even, people saying Happy Thanksgiving. I said, I don't do that. It's National Day of Mourning. And, so people, I'm very clear about where I stand. And yeah, again, people roll their eyes, or, and then they go, well, you're right. I'm like, it's not about me being right or wrong. It's not about that. My point about this is not to be wrong or right. It's just being principled about where you stand on something. And so that's just who I am. So yeah, these struggles are going to be everlasting as long as we're here. My final question to you both is just really, I'm wondering about what gifts you feel that are presented to you in being in a revolutionary family structure. So we've talked about some of the struggles under a capitalist system, but what are some gifts that you have encountered on the end of being raised in this family structure and on the end of raising a child in this structure?
Shukura, you go first.
Okay, I would say, echoing what I said before about my appreciation with being able to have explicit conversations with both my parents about struggles that I've encountered. So whether it was going to school in a capitalist system and feeling like I was not smart enough to be able to succeed, that was rhetoric that they had already been familiar with, A, because they had gone through school already, but B, because they were organizers where we were studying why the system dehumanizes people, especially Africans, and makes us feel like we're not enough, when clearly we were the creators of math and science, right? But yet, if you don't know the history, then you're not, or the herstory or the theirstory, then you're not going to be able to understand these things. And so I would say, from being elementary all the way up to college and having these different encounters where I needed to call out someone who had harmed me in a physical way, if you understand what I'm saying. And so, again, being able to advocate for those things, actually having parents that believed me. Like, I can't tell you how much that meant to me, because I think in some households, parents will make their children feel individualized and like they're not telling the truth. But when you are an organizer who is resisting systems of oppression, then you understand that these are the kind of things that are going to come up, especially when somebody is triply or quadruply oppressed. I also think that it's been a gift to be able to just have open conversations, again, about my dating challenges with both of my parents, in terms of just having a better understanding of what I'm looking for. And then I think I would also say, even with the few people that I've introduced my parents to, like um, Uncle Phil from Fresh Prince, like how are they going to respond when they meet my dad? But it was never like that. Of course, it was mutual and it was lovable and it was humbling, because we're socialist people and we understand the value of respecting other people, but also asking for that respect in return. And so I think all in all, just having the humanitarianism running through my veins, pulsing through my veins like oxygen every day, I think I would say that's a gift. I would say being able to call my parents and express frustration about something that happened at work, or an encounter that I had at the dog park, because I met quite a few white supremacists at the dog park, and them immediately understanding A, why I'm frustrated, B, how foul that situation was, and C, like why things should have been dealt with differently had one of them have been there. You know what I mean? And again, like just having a safe place to be able to complain about being oppressed, I think is really, really important. And that's a gift, because for a lot of people, they don't have that. And they're already feeling like they're not enough. And so then we have mental health issues that start to take place, because if you don't have a safe place to pour that into and release it, and have somebody tell you nothing is wrong with you, and a system that tells you constantly that something is wrong with you, that can be really challenging, really, really challenging. So I feel like there's more I can say with that, but I think that that's also enough. Thank you, Jamilah.
Yeah, and
Thank you.
I would just say I have I understand clearly that I am far from perfect. I make a ton of errors all the time. I do a lot and I make a ton of errors, but what I really see as gifts from this work is that I learned a long time ago, and I'm constantly developing a better understanding of this, is that by understanding that, I have the tools to do my best to do work on myself, to try to make myself a better person. And from doing that, I've gained a lot of strength. And that to me is, especially in an oppressive society, is the best gift that a person can receive, because once you have that self-confidence and you have that ability to see yourself as having value, then you can see other people as having value, and you can deal with situations in healthier ways. And you can do that. And when you're able to do that, it creates a reality for you where, like, I really like the person that I am. I want to continue to improve, but I do like the person that I am. I like what I stand for. I like what I do. And people have to respect me for that. And a lot of people don't, they may not like me. I really don't care, but they have to respect me because of how I try to live my life and what they see and how I've interacted with them and how they've seen me stand up to things that they would never in a million years stand up to. So that is to me, in this society, is the best gift that you can have.
Thank you. So do y'all have any final comments, any thoughts, any remembrances, anything you want to say?
Just for me, I really appreciate you. I know lately, my plate has been overflowing, so I haven't had a chance to talk to you, but I think about you all the time, and I will be back on track soon, as I mentioned, with all of the committee work and assignments we have. I'll be back with all of that, just needing to take care of these family matters, but I appreciate you.
I just, of course I echo what my dad said, but because I have my own thoughts too. I'm gonna also say that, Jamilah, you have just continued to be such a great mentor to me. So obviously my mom and my dad, yes, but also I was very clear in saying that I am in work study and I organize with the party. If you were listening, audience, I never said that I was a party member. So I have yet to grow and become pre-cadre and then cadre. And Jamilah, you've been an outstanding mentor of showing me how to navigate through all these different task force and committees, and you're showing up at meetings and you have energy when you show up, and you are taking these amazing notes that I have learned from and learned how to be a better note taker, how to pay attention to the things that really matter and not to put everything in there because everything is not important. I've really sat back and just learned so much about how to be a better organizer. I also thank you for inviting me to be in this space tonight, because truth be told, you could have easily have had this conversation with my parent, not with me, right? And so I'm just humbled that you felt like I could add something to it. And the fact that you and Evan have been doing these Pantsula podcasts for as long as you all have been doing it, the commitment, the time, the energy, the resources, the people, thank you.
Let's not miss Jesse, Sadiq, and Winfred as well. We've all been doing these episodes, but I really appreciate the work that y'all are doing. I mean, we definitely have different styles in these podcasts, but I think they're all equally as important, and they bring a certain level of political education that is needed in media So I definitely appreciate the Ancestors Voices podcast. And we do have other programs. So there's the weekly, or now it's like every other week, Pan-African News. There's Revolutionary African Women. There is the Forward Ever podcast. There's also the Forward Ever shop. There's also the Thomas Sankara Center in Burkina Faso. There's a lot of work being done around the world representing the All African People's Revolutionary Party. Because as mentioned in the beginning of every podcast we do, the purpose is having a unified Africa under scientific socialism. And the only thing that can be done in order to forward this work is organization. So please join an organization if you are not in one. If you're like, yeah, I hate thanks taking too, and yeah, just okay, join an organization where we can have an institution that benefits colonized people. If you hate this day so much, do the work to get rid of it. if you want a whole new world, you have to be on the front lines in order to change that. You can't complain about something and then when the change happens, you're like, yay, change. Like, but you haven't done anything. So please join an organization, whatever organization that is, make sure that it is something that is filled with justice for the masses of the people. Don't join an organization that's like focused on individuals, because that's not an organization. You just focus on an individual. You have to join an organization that focuses on something that benefits the masses of the people. So go do that. Go do that before you listen to this. Go do that after you listen to this. But no matter what, go do that. So I want to thank you both again so much for being here on this episode. And we really do hope to see you again at some point. And of course, we will see each other in any other capacity. But thank you so much. And as usual, we want to end and say forward ever, backwards never.
Backwards never. Yes. Thank you, Africans.
Thank
Love
you.
y'all.
Forward.